The biggest aviation crisis this country has ever seen has entered its second week. And the skies still feel unsettled. IndiGo says things are stabilizing, but the details tell a very different story. For the next few days, between 400 and 500 flights will be cancelled every single day. The airline says it will inform passengers 3 days in advance and issue refunds where needed. Necessary, yes, but it also shows just how fragile the situation really is. Now, here's what the former chief financial officer of AirAsia India said in an interview to the Times of India.
While monopoly is bad, why is there a monopoly? ATF is not within GST, so which means each state has its own way of taxing it. There are some states where the taxes are as high as 35% and 50% of my cost. Coupled with the fact that about 75% of my costs are paid for in dollar. Fuel, which is indexed to my Brent index, which is a dollar-denominated index. Structurally, we are not a very aviation-friendly economy, and we need to do something about that.
Flying in India has become very risky. He links the IndiGo crisis mainly to the new flight duty time limit regulations by the DGCA, but also points to deeper structural problems. The industry has shifted from a service-focused approach to a purely transport-focused model, hurting passenger experience. About 75% of airline costs are paid in dollars, leaving carriers highly exposed to global fluctuations. He also highlights a monopoly issue, with IndiGo dominating many key routes and fewer competitors after the collapse of Jet Airways, Kingfisher and Go First. And then came the Delhi High Court's sharp question to the center. The judges looked at the chaos, the crowds stranded without answers, and asked the government directly, are you really that helpless? When other airlines hiked their fares, what exactly did you do? When IndiGo stumbled, where were the regulators? Why was there silence when ticket prices shot up from 4 to 5k to 30,000 rupees? How did other airlines get to exploit situations so easily? And what action did you take to stop it? The government isn't blameless here. They share responsibility for this mess. They didn't stop at that. They said IndiGo must compensate passengers who spent the night on airport floors. Think about that. The country's biggest airline was told by the court to make amends because the disruption had gone too far to brush aside. And the pressure is now spreading across the system. The DGCA itself is under fire. The regulator has suspended 4 of its own flight operations, inspectors citing serious oversight failures linked to the crisis. This wasn't a single airline problem. It was institutional. IndiGo's top management has also been summoned. CEO Peter Elbers and COO Isidro Porqueras appeared before the DGCA's probe panel for a second straight day, facing hours of questioning over how operations were allowed to unravel so badly. IndiGo has now called in external help. The airline has appointed Chief Aviation Advisors LLC, led by veteran aviation expert Captain John Ilson, to conduct an independent root cause analysis and recommend fixes. And then comes the cost of the chaos. IndiGo says it is identifying passengers who were severely impacted and stranded at airports between December 3rd and 5th. The airline plans to reach out to them in January with compensation. The estimated bill, more than 500 crore rupees. That number alone tells you the scale of damage, not just to schedules, but to credibility. And remember, this is IndiGo we are talking about. The airline that made flying affordable for millions. The airline that stitched together Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities long before anyone else cared. The airline that gave India punctuality charts worth bragging about. For nearly 2 decades, IndiGo was the symbol of reliability. This is also the same airline now trying to expand globally. New routes to the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Europe. Wide-body ambition, international partnerships. IndiGo has spent years preparing to go from a low-cost domestic king to a global player, which makes this meltdown even harder to process. To understand the collapse, collapse, we go back to January 2024 when the government updated flight duty time limits. More rest for pilots, fewer night landings, no back-to-back night duties, stricter fatigue tracking. Later, the Delhi High Court even set a phased rollout, partial implementation by July 1, 2025, and full enforcement by November 1. IndiGo had months to plan, yet when the rules kicked in, the entire system cracked. Because IndiGo's network is unlike anything else in India. Almost 2,300 flights a day. Air India follows at around 1,000. IndiGo's entire model depends on fast rotations, tight scheduling, maximum utilization. Aircraft barely rests, pilots even less. That efficiency helped them to keep fares low. It also made the structure brittle. Once pilots start hitting duty limits, the whole chain falls apart. One delay becomes 10, one cancelled crew becomes a regional shutdown. And the numbers show the collapse step by step. On-time performance dropped from 84% to 67%, then crashed to 5%. At 5%, you're not running an airline, you're running damage control. Pilot groups say IndiGo resisted implementing the rules. Some say the airline coped. Rising pressure would soften the deadlines. Eventually, the DGCA did step in with one-time reprieve, postponing full implementation to February. The regulator is now investigating how much of this was miscalculation and how much was simply inevitable. But the truth is, India is not an aviation-friendly economy. Not yet. Our infrastructure didn't keep pace with demand. Our training ecosystem didn't match our ambitions. And our regulatory processes are still catching up with a market growing faster than most in the world. Take pilots. For example, the United States has around 7 pilots per 100,000 people. Europe has almost 6. India has fewer than 1. Training schools are limited, approvals are slow, and foreign pilots need multiple permissions. IndiGo wasn't just running low on pilots, it was running on a system that doesn't produce enough in the first place. And to make things worse, IndiGo was already dealing with A320 software inspections and long-running Pratt and Whitney engine issues that grounded dozens of aircraft. The airline was stretched thin before the fatigue rules pulled the final thread. And here's the bigger structural question. When one airline carries nearly 60% of India's domestic passengers, any shock turns into a national problem. The market is effectively split between IndiGo on one side and the Tata Airlines on the other. A duopoly in all but name. When competition shrinks, resilience shrinks. When giants stumble, the entire system shakes. So what happens now? Hiring more pilots takes time. Raising salaries lifts fares. Building academies is a long-term bet. Slowing expansion doesn't please investors. Automation is years away. There are no shortcuts. So how should we read this moment? Did IndiGo misjudge the impact of the duty time rules? Did the system underestimated how delicate the network truly was? Or is this simply what happens when a booming aviation economy grows on thin margins, thin talent, and thin competition? Tell me what you think in the comments. This is Indu Tyagi and you are watching WantStats. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Stay tuned to WantStats for the news that matters.